The training hall of the Galactic Academy buzzed with energy as cadets from dozens of alien species gathered for one of the most important tests of their lives. The air shimmered with light from holographic panels and the soft hum of alien machinery. It was the Universal Combat Engineering Challenge, a test of skill and intelligence where the best young warriors of the galaxy competed to design the most effective weapon. The hall was filled with creatures of all shapes and colors: reptilian Threxians with scales that glistened like armor, tall insectoid Vurak with many shining eyes, and crystalline Zenth whose bodies glowed softly from within. Each species carried the pride of their homeworld, and every cadet was determined to prove their race superior. At the center stood Instructor Kalor, a tall creature with sharp mandibles and a deep voice that echoed off the walls. He raised his clawed hand and announced that each cadet must build a weapon using only the materials available in the room. The challenge was simple, but the meaning behind it was not. It was a test of creativity, intelligence, and understanding of warfare. Kalor's voice was cold, as he reminded them that in the galaxy, a true warrior must be ready to adapt. As the test began, the hall erupted into noise and light. The alien students rushed to the forges, workbenches, and energy tools provided. The Tavarians began shaping glowing plasma blades that hissed and shimmered. The Zenth, masters of crystal manipulation, formed elegant energy weapons from fragments of light. The Threxians, with their strength, hammered pieces of metal into brutal spiked clubs. Sparks flew, colors flashed, and the air grew warm with power and ambition. In the middle of this storm of activity stood a lone human, Cadet Mara Hale from Earth. She was smaller than most of the others, wearing a standard academy uniform slightly burned from old training sessions. Her brown hair was tied back roughly, and her calm eyes scanned the room, watching as others worked. While everyone else reached for the strange alien tools, Mara stood quietly thinking. She walked slowly around the room, looking not at the advanced equipment but at the simple things: the walls, the chairs, the floor. Then she stopped near a metal chair in the corner. Without hesitation, she grabbed it, lifted it over her knee, and with a sharp snap broke off one of its legs. The sudden crack made several students turn to look. They stared at her in disbelief. One of the Zenth cadets clicked disapprovingly, asking why she was breaking furniture instead of using the advanced tools. Mara didn't answer right away. She examined the metal rod in her hand, testing its weight, then smiled faintly. She tore a strip of cloth from her uniform sleeve and wrapped it around one end for grip. She knelt and scraped the other end against the metal floor until it sharpened into a rough but deadly point. Then she stood straight and held it like a spear. The other cadets whispered among themselves, laughing at the primitive sight. Instructor Kalor approached, his insect-like eyes narrowing. "Explain your creation, human," he said in a cold tone. Mara looked at him calmly, the faintest smirk on her lips. She raised the spear slightly and said, "It's simple. It works even when everything else fails." The hall grew silent. For a long moment, Kalor just stared at her, his antennae twitching as if unsure whether to mock or admire her. Around them, the hum of machines and the hiss of plasma faded into the background. Mara stood still, holding her handmade spear with quiet confidence while others stood surrounded by their glowing weapons. The instructor finally nodded and turned away, his expression unreadable. The test continued, but whispers spread through the hall. Some called her primitive, others called her dangerous. Yet deep inside, everyone, even the proudest alien cadet, felt something unsettling in their chest, a strange, cold respect for the human who had built a weapon from nothing but a broken chair. Only 2 weeks after the challenge, the Galactic Academy fell into chaos. It began with a tremor that shook the metal floors, followed by a blaring alarm that echoed through every hall. At first, the students thought it was another training drill, but then the lights dimmed, and the instructors' calm voices were replaced by screams over the intercom. The Dravak swarm had come. The Dravak were a hive-minded species known across the galaxy as destroyers, their ships black as ash, their soldiers ruthless and endless. They conquered worlds by flooding them with soldiers who fought without fear or mercy. The sky outside the academy turned red with fire as hundreds of Dravak ships descended, firing plasma bursts that tore through shields and shattered hulls. The proud academy, once a place of learning, became a battlefield within minutes. Mara Hale ran through the smoke-filled corridors, her heartbeat loud in her ears. Around her, alien cadets screamed and scrambled, their perfect order collapsing into panic. The Tavarians' plasma blades sputtered uselessly, their power cores fried by the Dravak's interference field. The Zenth tried to form energy weapons with their minds, but the neural jammers from the invading ships cut off their connection. Every advanced weapon failed, every automated system went dark. The once bright academy now flickered with sparks and falling debris. Mara stopped at a junction, coughing as smoke filled her lungs, and saw a group of frightened cadets hiding behind a half-collapsed wall. They looked at her helplessly, their faces glowing faintly under the emergency lights. "Our weapons aren't working," a young Threxian shouted, his claws shaking. "They've jammed everything." Mara dropped her bag to the floor and pulled out something that looked oddly out of place in the midst of the burning high-tech academy. A simple metal rod wrapped in cloth, the same one she had made from the chair leg. Her fingers tightened around the grip as she turned toward the sound of heavy footsteps. The Dravak were close. "Then we fight without them," she said, her voice steady. A group of insect-like Dravak soldiers burst through the smoke, their dark armor gleaming and their blade-like limbs slashing through the air. They towered over her, chittering with cruel confidence. One lunged forward, swinging its weapon, but Mara stepped aside and drove the sharp end of her spear deep into the creature's neck joint. A hiss of black smoke rose as the Dravak fell lifeless to the floor. The aliens behind her froze in shock. She yanked her spear free, turned, and faced the others. "You want to live? Then pick up something and fight!" she shouted. Her voice, though human, carried a weight that silenced their fear. One by one, the cadets rose. A Threxian tore a metal pipe from the wall. A Zenth grabbed a fallen beam, and even the timid Tavarian held a broken tool like a club. Together they followed Mara as she moved through the corridor, striking hard and fast, using instinct and strength instead of technology. Every clash echoed like thunder through the hallways, and though the cadets were clumsy at first, they began to move with purpose, their fear turning into determination. They fought their way to the central command hub, where the Dravak had already breached the outer defense line. Through shattered glass, Mara could see the endless black swarm of enemy ships outside, circling like vultures. The cadets looked to her again, uncertain and terrified. She stood before them, her face smeared with soot and blood, and said, "We hold this place. No one else is coming. It's just us now." There was no great plan, no grand technology, only courage and desperation. The next wave of Dravak poured in, and the room became a storm of movement, screams, and fire. Mara's spear flashed in the red light as she fought at the front, her body moving like it remembered battles from long ago, battles fought with stone and iron. By the time the smoke cleared, the Dravak lay in piles across the floor, and the human still stood, breathing hard, her hands covered in black dust. The cadets looked at her with awe and fear, realizing that she had done the impossible. Where machines failed, where energy weapons died, the simplest weapon, a chair-leg-turned spear, had become the symbol of survival. The Dravak swarm had turned the skies outside the academy into a sea of fire. From the shattered windows of the orbital station, burning ships drifted past like dying stars, and the silence between explosions felt heavier than the noise itself. Inside the wreckage, Mara Hale and the surviving cadets moved through the dark, smoke-filled corridors, stepping over the remains of broken machines and fallen students. The station's automated defenses were gone, its reactors barely humming, and the smell of metal and smoke filled the air. Every few seconds, the walls trembled from distant impacts as the Dravak ships kept firing. The group had lost contact with the instructors days ago, and there was no signal from command. They were alone, stranded in a dying fortress, surrounded by the most feared species in the galaxy. Most of the cadets had lost hope. Some whispered about surrender, others about hiding, but Mara refused to give up. Her eyes, tired but sharp, searched for any advantage they could use. When they reached the command bay, the power flickered weakly, casting long shadows over the cracked floor. The control panels sparked with broken circuits, and every screen showed the same hopeless image. Dravak ships surrounding them on all sides. The aliens in her group looked to her again, waiting for an answer, because even though she was only one human among them, something about her calmness felt like safety. Mara studied the holographic map that still blinked faintly. "We can't fight them with what we don't have," she said after a long silence. "So we'll fight them with what we do." The others didn't understand at first. "But what do we have?" asked the young Zenth, his crystal skin dimming in despair. Mara looked around the room, broken pipes, metal scraps, half-melted tools, and smiled faintly. "We have a lot," she said. She set them to work. They tore apart the furniture, stripped wires from the walls, and pulled panels off the floor. Under her guidance, they began crafting weapons by hand. Mara used her spear as an example, showing them how to shape the ends into sharp points using friction and heat from sparking cables. The Tavarians, who were used to high-tech forges, struggled. At first, their claws slipping on rough metal, but soon they began to understand. The Zenth learned to channel their natural energy into the metal to make it stronger. The Threxians, with their great strength, bent steel into curved blades. It was hard, dirty work, and their hands bled and burned, but slowly the pile of scrap became a small armory. When one of the aliens looked at the crude weapons in disgust and muttered that these were nothing but sticks, Mara laughed quietly and said, "Sticks built civilizations before machines ever did. You just have to know how to use them." Rui shook. Words struck something deep in them, something ancient that all species shared, the will to survive. When the next attack came, they were ready. The Dravak soldiers crashed through the airlock with their usual confidence, expecting easy prey, but what they met instead was chaos. The cadets fought like creatures born for war. They moved fast, hiding in smoke striking from behind walls and dark corners. They didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like survivors. The sharp metal spears pierced through the gaps in Dravak armor, and the heavy steel clubs shattered their limbs. Mara moved at the center of the fight, her body flowing with precision and strength, every strike of her spear clean and sure. The aliens who had once doubted her now fought beside her, shouting with fierce energy. The corridors filled with the sound of metal against armor, roars, and battle cries that echoed through the station. When the fight ended, dozens of Dravak bodies lay scattered, and the survivors stood panting but alive. For the first time since the invasion began, the cadets felt hope. They realized that even without their advanced weapons, they could still fight and win. Mara stood among them, her hands trembling from exhaustion, but her voice steady. "Now you see," she said softly, "it was never about the weapon. It's about the one who holds it." And from that moment on, the small group of survivors became something more than frightened students. They became warriors, united by the oldest truth in the galaxy, that courage and will were deadlier than any machine. The days passed like ghosts drifting through smoke. The Academy station floated silently above the burning planet below, surrounded by wreckage and the bodies of ships that once shone like jewels. Inside, Mara Hale and her small group of survivors moved carefully through the cold halls, searching for food, water, and shelter, while the echoes of distant fighting still trembled through the metal walls. They had fought off several Dravak assaults, but each battle left them weaker. The alien cadets who had once looked down on the human now followed her without question. They called themselves the Spearborn, a name whispered at first as a joke but soon carried with pride. Mara led them with quiet strength, always at the front, her simple spear never leaving her side. It had become more than a weapon. It was a symbol of what they had learned from her. Survival through will, not through machines. One night, when the red light of the damaged reactor painted the walls like fire, the group rested in the ruins of a communications bay. The Zenth cadet, his crystal skin faintly glowing in the darkness, looked up from where he sat and asked softly, "Human, why do you keep fighting? We have no ships, no help, and no chance. Why not rest and wait for the end?" Mara looked at him for a long moment, her eyes tired but filled with the same quiet fire that had kept them alive. "Because we're not dead yet," she said simply. "Humans fight until there's nothing left to fight with. That's how we've always lived. We survived ice ages, monsters, wars, and even ourselves. We don't stop because stopping means we lose everything." Her words hung in the silence, and for the first time, the others understood the strange power that drove her. It wasn't strength or skill. It was the stubborn will to keep standing even when the universe tried to crush you. Later that same night, as the group shared the last of their ration packs, the Threxian cadet pointed to the blinking lights of the command console. "The Dravak mothership," he said. "It's docked outside. That's where their control signals come from." The faint holographic display showed the massive ship's shadow covering the station like a dark moon. It was the heart of the invasion, the mind of the swarm. Mara stared at it, her jaw tightening. She knew that as long as that ship lived, the Dravak would never stop. "If we take it out," she said quietly, "we end this." The others looked at her in disbelief. The idea of fighting the mothership with their broken tools sounded like madness. "We'd die before reaching it," said the Tavarian, his voice trembling. Mara nodded slowly. "Maybe," she said, But if someone doesn't stop them, everyone dies. Sometimes that's the choice. She walked over to the reactor schematics still faintly glowing on the console and traced a path with her finger. If we can get to the lower reactor bay, we can overload it. The blast would destroy the station and the mothership docked to it. Her voice was steady, but the silence that followed was heavy. They all knew what she was suggesting. To trigger the overload, someone would have to stay behind to release the manual lock. No one spoke for a long time. The Zenth lowered his head. The Threxian's claws flexed nervously and even the Vurak cadet's wings drooped. They all understood the meaning behind her calm tone. This was a one-way mission. Mara turned away and looked out through a cracked window at the stars. Every species here was taught to fight with power, she said softly. But real power isn't in your weapons. It's in choosing to stand when you could run. Her voice broke slightly as she spoke, not from fear but from the weight of what she knew was coming. The group watched her in silence, the flickering red light reflecting in their eyes. For the first time since the invasion began, there was no fear among them, only resolve. They were tired, wounded, and half-starved, but their spirits burned brighter than ever. The plan was set. At dawn, what remained of the academy would rise for one final fight. Mara knew she would not return, but she didn't care. Humanity had always been small in the galaxy, but she would prove that being small didn't mean being weak. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a strange peace, knowing that even if she fell, the story of the spear, and the will behind it, would live on. The final morning on the dying station began in silence. The air was cold, the lights dim, and the distant rumble of the Dravak fleet echoed like thunder through the walls. Mara Hale stood at the front of the group, her hands wrapped around her battered spear. The others gathered behind her, the spearborn, the last surviving cadets of the academy. Their faces were pale and tired, but their eyes burned with determination. They knew what they were about to do. There would be no retreat, no rescue, no escape. This was the end, and they had chosen to meet it standing. Mara took one last look at the flickering map on the command screen. The path to the reactor bay was filled with Dravak patrols, but they had no other option. "Stay quiet, move fast, and don't stop," she said softly. Her voice carried calm strength, the kind that steadied hearts even in the face of death. With a nod, she led the way into the shadowed corridor, the spear in her hand gleaming faintly under the emergency lights. They moved through the wreckage like ghosts, their footsteps silent on the cold metal floor. Every few meters, a distant explosion shook the corridor as the Dravak continued their assault. The spearborn slipped through broken doors and smoke-filled passages, the air heavy with the stench of burnt metal. As they neared the reactor bay, a sharp hiss echoed ahead. Dravak soldiers crawled from the ceiling vents and shadows, their eyes glowing red, their limbs cutting the air like blades. The ambush came fast. Mara barely had time to shout before they were surrounded. The first creature lunged, its claw aimed at her throat, but she spun to the side and drove her spear through its chest. "Fight!" she yelled, her voice echoing through the chamber. The aliens responded instantly, using the makeshift weapons they had forged. A Threxian swung a heavy pipe, crushing 2 attackers while the Zenth used shards of broken crystal to cut through armor. The corridor turned into chaos, filled with screams and the clash of metal against bone. Mara fought at the center of it all, her movements sharp and sure, each strike perfectly placed. Her spear, though old and dented, moved like an extension of her soul. As the battle raged, they pushed forward step by step, losing one fighter after another. The Vurak cadet fell first, shielding the others from an explosion. The Zenth followed soon after, impaled while saving Mara from a strike she didn't see coming. Grief burned in her chest, but she kept moving. She couldn't stop now. When they finally reached the massive doors of the reactor bay, only 3 of them remained. The entrance was guarded by a group of Dravak elites, larger, faster, and deadlier than any they had faced before. Mara looked at her companions, their bodies shaking with exhaustion, and gave them a faint, tired smile. "You know what to do," she said. Then, before they could argue, she charged. The Dravak rushed to meet her, their weapons flashing. Mara ducked under one swing, stabbed upward, and twisted the spear free in a blur of motion. Her body moved with a grace born of desperation and will, each strike fueled by the memory of every fallen comrade. The fight was brutal, close, and filled with blood. Her uniform was torn, her arms cut, but she never stopped. One by one, the Dravak fell until the floor was covered with their bodies. "Go!" she shouted to the others as the last guard fell. "Get to the escape shaft!" They hesitated, but the fire in her eyes left no room for argument. They ran, leaving her standing alone in front of the reactor's glowing core. The air shimmered with heat, and warning lights began to flash red as she entered the control chamber. Her legs trembled, her breath came heavy, but she pressed the manual release valve with shaking hands. The reactor began to overload, humming louder and louder until it felt like the entire station was trembling. Mara stepped to the viewing window and looked out at the stars one last time. The Dravek mothership loomed outside, huge and dark, unaware of what was about to come. She gripped her spear tightly, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Let's see if this old stick can end a war," she whispered. Then with a final push, she slammed her hand down on the override switch. A blinding white light filled the chamber, followed by silence. The explosion tore through the station, consuming everything in its path, and the Dravak fleet vanished in a storm of fire that burned brighter than any star. The galaxy was quiet after the explosion. The once bright and crowded orbit of the Academy was now a field of glowing debris slowly drifting through space. For days, rescue ships from the Galactic Council searched the wreckage, calling out for survivors through static-filled channels. Most of what they found were broken hulls, burnt metal, and fragments of lives lost in the battle. Then, on the fourth day, a small signal was detected from a damaged escape pod floating near the edge of the system. Inside were the last surviving members of the Spearborn, exhausted, wounded, but alive. They were pulled aboard a council cruiser and taken to the nearest starbase for treatment. When the medics asked them what had happened, they spoke not of technology or tactics, but of a human with a broken chair leg who had turned hopelessness into strength. They told the story of Mara Hale, the human who fought when all others had given up, who had led them not with fear, but with courage, and who had ended the Dravak invasion at the cost of her life. The news of her sacrifice spread quickly across the galaxy. For the first time, worlds that had once dismissed humanity as a small, primitive species began to see them differently. The Galactic Council held a meeting in her honor, and even the oldest, proudest races stood in silence when her name was spoken. The surviving cadets stood before the council chamber, still wearing the torn remnants of their uniforms. The Zenth cadet, his crystal surface cracked and dull, spoke for all of them. His voice was soft but clear as he said, "She showed us something no weapon could teach. She showed us what it means to fight, not with strength or power, but with heart. The weapon she built was not the spear. It was the will to stand when the universe wanted us to kneel." His words echoed through the vast chamber, and even the hardened council elders lowered their heads in respect. After the ceremony, the council ordered that the remains of the Academy be searched one last time. Deep in the wreckage, among twisted beams and burnt panels, a recovery team found something floating in the dark. A single metal rod, bent and scorched, its cloth handle half burnt away. The technicians who found it recognized it immediately. It was the chair leg that had become the spear. They brought it back carefully, sealing it inside a transparent case. When it was presented to the council, the entire chamber fell silent. It wasn't a weapon made of plasma or crystal or energy. It was something simple, human, and pure. The council decided it would be kept as a memorial in the rebuilt Galactic Academy. They placed it on a pedestal at the center of the new Hall of Heroes, under a glass dome surrounded by light. Above it, carved into stone, were the words that would be remembered for generations. When asked to build a weapon, the human made a spear and changed the galaxy. In the years that followed, every academy across the stars began teaching a new philosophy inspired by Mara Hale. It was called the Human Doctrine, the belief that the mind and spirit of a warrior were stronger than any machine. Cadets were taught to survive without technology, to think fast, to adapt, and to never surrender. In time, those who followed this training became the galaxy's most respected soldiers. Statues of Mara were built across worlds, some showing her standing tall with her spear, others simply showing her calm face, eyes looking toward the stars. The spear-born survivors continued to serve, spreading her story wherever they went. They spoke not of loss, but of legacy, reminding every species that hope could be rebuilt even from broken metal. Many years later, a new generation of cadets walked through the grand hall of the Academy, stopping before the glass case. The spear still stood there, its metal dark and scarred but unbroken. Some would stare at it in silence, imagining the woman who once held it, wondering how a simple human had done what no army could. And though centuries would pass, her story would remain the same. How one soldier with nothing but courage, heart, and a broken chair leg had reminded the galaxy of what it truly meant to fight for survival.